on now, and let's talk about Nisa Nandy, and let's talk to the Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters, Helen Joyce. Thanks for joining us, Helen.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, last time we spoke, I was probably being a bit down on Labour. I said, are you happy that they will look after women's rights, that the direction of travel under the Tories towards the end, I think, was a good one. They were starting to show a little bit of common sense about fairness to women. You know, let's not call them people with cervixes. Let's maybe at least contemplate the possibility that maybe it's not fair, blokes competing against women in sport, that kind of thing. Well, guess what's happened? Lisa Nandy, the new Culture Secretary, has said that it's the right approach for individual sporting bodies to decide whether or not to bar trans athletes from female competitions. Frankly, Helen, that is a disgraceful cop-out. I had Sharon Davis on the show 2 nights ago talking about what I'm calling the unfair Olympics. And both of us were agreeing, but she was, of course, laying out this absurdity that these Olympic Games, some of the events are righteous, and they've said, look, no trans women can compete against women. In other words, biological males are not allowed to compete against biological females. The only common sense approach to women's sports. Other sports at the Olympics will allow that. That is mad, and I don't think that the Culture Secretary has helped the situation at all by saying individual sports should decide. No, there should be a blanket rule, shouldn't there?
There should be, but what you have to understand is where Lisa Nandy has moved from. And, you know, actually, you've just shown yourself in the previous segment to be like, let's wait and see, let's wait until all of it comes in. 4 years ago, Lisa Nandy was saying trans men are men, trans women are women. And she literally said that male rapists should be put in women's jails if that's how they identified. And then in this most recent interview, what she said is biology matters, fairness matters. The right approach is that individual sports look at this because they're best placed to do it. I don't agree with that bit. But my goodness, has she moved in 4 years. So I'm just waiting for her to move the rest of the way, basically. I think once somebody says that biology matters for fairness for women's sports, which she did say in the full interview, they will get to the end point. They absolutely will get to the end point. It's just a question of time. I hope she hurries up and does it. The Olympics is too late, by the way, and of course that's not under her control anyway. That's the International Olympic Committee, who are a pack of idiots who started all of this.
I know, and that's the point. So, okay, we'll grant Lisa Nandy this. She's on a journey. She is on a journey. Why an intelligent person needs to be on a journey to reach a destination that is quite obvious to you, me, Sharon Davis, and frankly anyone with any sense of fairness, why it's taking a journey, I cannot begin to understand.
I can tell you why. It's because the sporting authorities did it. Like, it's still already self-ID in cricket. There are, I think it's 72 trans women, that means men, competing in football in England alone. So, you know, how is everybody else meant to understand it when the people who are charged with running these things have screwed it all up? So what I think she should have said, and I hope she says it soon, is all of these sports governing bodies get a lot of public money, and they should all get not a single penny until they treat women fairly, and that means no men, no matter how they identify, in any women's sport at any level. Job done, and that's the way it used to be. Go back to that, and if you don't want to go back to that, you don't get a penny of public money.
Well, okay, obviously I'm with you all the way. Do you really think Lisa Nandy and her fellow cabinet ministers at Labour will arrive at that point?
My experience is that once people realise that the whole trans men are men, trans women are women thing is just meaningless. You know, trans men are women, trans women are men. That's the point. Once the crack starts in that facade of the easy trot out the slogans, there's only one direction of travel. Like the full interview, she gave it in House magazine, which is for MPs and peers, and in it she repeatedly says that biology matters, that it's impossible to reconcile fairness with self-ID, and then she doesn't quite make the last step. She says, leave it to the individual sporting authorities. Everybody's always trying to pass the buck on this, but she's already 80% of the way there. I mean, you can't go back from there. Like, once you start to think about fairness, well, if it's not fair in cricket, or it is fair in cricket, then it's the same in football. It's the same in every sport.
So,
it's not like magically women can, hit the ball harder in cricket than they can in hockey.
well, exactly. I mean, what we're talking about, is this absurdity that too many sports, and there will be sports at the Olympics where this happens, basically got blokes competing against women. That is mad. That's insane.
It is mad.
And it's the destruction.
Sadly,
it's the destruction of women's sport as well. If we don't stop it.
we got ourselves here because people weren't looking. Like, people said trans women, and that sounds like a type of woman. It doesn't sound like a type of man, which is what it actually is. Nobody was paying attention. Nobody thought this would happen. Now it's happening, and sadly, the rules have been all rewritten, to embed insanity in them. And now we have the hard, miserable work of working backwards, and every person who's the first to move gets attacked. That's one reason why politicians don't want to be the first to speak on this. They want someone else to do the dirty job, but then somebody else wants them to do the dirty job. That's why I say funding is the answer. Like, you can say, look, you can have men in your sports if you like, but we don't like that sort of thing, so no money for you. And then they will step in line. That's what I'd do if I were her.
Well, I mean, what she says, Lisa Nandy, and by the way, it sounds like we're sort of having a go at her, which I am to an extent, but she is representative of quite a few cowardly politicians who won't confront the reality of these situations. But what she says in this interview is that it is the right approach for decisions to be made by individual sports. She says, I think we ought to respect the fact they're far more expert in making those judgments and decisions than we are. Helen, you don't need to be an expert to realise or to deduce that it isn't fair to have blokes competing against women in sport. It is useless political language. As you say, let's grant her the fact she's on a journey, but that still is not good enough from a culture secretary, is it?
No, I agree. I mean, it isn't. I mean, what I would say is that there are going to be some really awful scenes in the Olympics, and everybody's looking at it. And, I wish it wasn't going to happen. I wish that there weren't women who were going to have their dreams unfairly shattered. But I didn't make this nonsense happen. We have to get there. We put it on the world stage, make an absolute laughingstock of idiots who said that this was a good rule, and that gives momentum to work in the other direction. Lots of politicians wait for someone else to give them cover. Like, it's the mark of a really, truly brilliant politician that they get themselves out in front of the direction of travel. So I hope that there are some people like that in Keir's government. Let's see. But, that's the direction of travel. The faster, the better. As soon as you say biology matters for fairness, there is only one end point. I just want us to get there very faster and have fewer people's lives destroyed.
I do too. Our friend Sharon Davis is out there now. She will be commentating for the BBC team. The BBC sports editor has likened what he called prejudice against trans women competing in women's sports to prejudice against black athletes competing against white athletes because they tend to be better at running. That, frankly, is a disgusting comparison that borders on racism and is certainly incredibly sexist.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, that was before he took up the job. He had been announced as the next person in the job, and he hadn't started it. That should immediately have ended his chance to move into that job. He can't possibly work for a state broadcaster that's funded by our taxes and that is statutorily required to be impartial. I mean, yeah. So it's everywhere. So you ask, how did Lisa Nandy think this? Well, the top sports journalists think it, or say they think it. The governing bodies think it.
Yeah,
the IOC thinks it. So how, she probably wasn't paying any attention. She might not even be interested in sport. I hope she gets interested in sport in her current job.
Yeah. One would hope. Now, let's move on to the IOC, which you described as a bunch of idiots. Sharon Davis, I know, absolutely despises them. They say their official stance is we refuse something like we will not discriminate against athletes who choose their own gender identity and they should be allowed to compete as such, something along those lines. But that very statement means they will discriminate against women.
Totally. I mean, I don't discriminate against people who say they're the opposite sex. I just don't believe them. I'm not playing along. Like, it's completely fine. If a man wants to say he's a woman, I'm like, fill your boots, do what you like, but don't compete as a woman. So, lots of sports have gone that direction. At the time of the last Olympics, there were more sports globally that said similarly stupid things because they all took their lead from the IOC. And then, sanity started to return. It's funny how everyone goes mad at once. and then they return to sanity and dribs and drabs. That's what we're seeing at the moment. And a good, strong statement from a sports secretary in an important country like the UK could ripple out through the whole world. It wouldn't just be the UK. Because, of course, you can't just have fair rules in one country when the competitions are international. So I have no doubt whatsoever that we will get to fairness, say, by 10 years' time and possibly by 5. And it's quite painful to think that we have to live through that, because it's also stupid. We could just, snap our fingers now and say, go back to the way it was, women in women's sports, men in men's sports, call yourself what you like, I don't care. And we'd be back at fairness now. But sadly, it's going to take continued pressure, and, voters have to tell politicians what they think.
Who knows, Helen? We could even go back to that system that seemed to work so well for so long. When you have public lavatories, some of them are called ladies and some of them are called gents. Who decided that wasn't a satisfactory system? Because it did work rather well, and the system we have now is a shambles. Just like the IOC are presiding over the shambolic Olympics, the unfair Olympics. Why can't the IOC do what is clearly the sensible thing to say, we have a blanket rule? It's just ridiculous to have a massive sporting event during which some events will allow trans women to compete against women and others won't. That is absurd on an epic scale, isn't it?
I think they just don't care, Kevin. I think it's that simple. I mean, there's a reason that Sharon Davies is in this fight. I'm sure you know, because I'm sure she told you that she had to compete against East German women who were doping. Everybody knew they were doping. All the officials knew they were doping, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. And when anyone who said anything about it got told they would get no sponsorship, that they would get dropped from teams, they got ostracized. The same thing has happened over the last 10 years in women's sports. All the women think it's unfair. When you do a survey of female athletes anonymously, overwhelmingly they tell you they think it's unfair, but they won't speak publicly because they get dropped from their teams and their sponsors tell them to shut up. So this is why courage and leadership matter in politics. I do appreciate that Lisa Nandy has been on a journey, and I'm not willing to quote things she said 4 years ago when she has said much better things now, but it is now her job. She's in government. She's the secretary for sport. It's her job to take the heat and not to leave it to the female athletes. So I implore her to follow her thought all the way through to the end. She's got as far as what fairness means. Now she has to think, right, it's fairness everywhere.
Yeah, stand up for yourself, Lisa. Do the decent thing.
Stand up for all women.
Exactly.
All women, all of us.
Absolutely. And one last question, really, Helen. Are you optimistic that this will be the last unfair Olympics?
No, not completely. I think it might be the second last unfair Olympics. It has taken us decades to get here, and I often use a homely metaphor. If any of your listeners are gardeners, once you let bindweed into your garden and you leave it to spread, you have a hell of a job getting it back out again. And with these terrible policies, that's what we've done. We've allowed this nonsense to infest everywhere, and now we're going to go around and pick it all out bit by bit, really consistently, and keep on top of it as well. So,
Helen, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Great stuff. Thank you very much. Helen Joyce, the excellent Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters.